Welcome to Dronecast, Rethinking Public Safety One Drone at a Time, a podcast by DroneSense. We explore real-world applications of drones and emergency response, offering a close examination of evolving trends in drone technology and its impact on public safety. I'm your host, John McLeod, Director of Customer Success here at DroneSense. Welcome to Dronecast. I'm your host, John McLeod. Today, I'm excited to introduce a true trailblazer in the world of public safety UAS technology, Charles Werner. With a career spanning over 4 decades in emergency response and advisory roles, Charles brings a wealth of experience and insight to the table. From his tenure as fire chief for the city of Charlottesville to his current position as director of DroneResponders Public Safety Alliance and chair of the National Council on Public Safety UAS. Additionally, Charles has held numerous advisory roles and notably chaired the DHS SAFECOM Executive Committee, the IAFC Technology Council, National Information Sharing Consortium, and the DHS White House Incident Management Information Sharing Subcommittee. Charles has also been awarded numerous honors, including the 2006 IAFC President's Award, the 2008 National Career Fire Chief of the Year, and the 2018 Homeland Security Person of the Year, just to cherry pick a few. Currently, Charles serves notably as the director of DroneResponders, and I'm so excited to speak with him today. So welcome to Dronecast, Chief. We're excited to have you.
Hey, it's great to be here, and I'm always glad to be sharing information about how you can start a drone program, but also to know really what's involved in doing that.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And I think as probably the listeners have picked up on from the intro, you've had kind of a long and illustrious career within public safety in general and the fire service in particular. So kind of taking us back a little bit to how you got into that one. 37 years is quite a career span in the fire service in particular. So what attracted you to that line of work and what kept you engaged and has continued to keep you engaged for so long?
Well, as many of the people that are probably listening knows, they watch television shows. And as I was growing up, first of all, I was in a fire service family. My uncle was the paid fire chief in Harrisonburg, Virginia. My other uncle was an assistant chief for one of the volunteer companies. My cousin was a career firefighter, and my dad was a volunteer in both the fire department and the rescue squad. So I was kind of exposed to it early. But watching TV, I had gotten a little bit interested in first, M12, about being a police officer. Kind of was thinking about that. And then Dragnet came, and I was thinking maybe I want to be a detective. And then emergency came on, and it was about the same time that I was getting an opportunity to volunteer in the fire department. So I started in the junior fire department at the age of 14. And so by 16, I was actually the captain of the volunteer fire department in Harrisonburg, Virginia. But I got interested because it was always something different. It was exciting, and it was a way that I could help my community and help people, which was very rewarding. I mean, there's nothing that you can do any better than to help somebody else in a time of their worst need. And so that's been my entire career of doing that. And then when I retired, I went to work for the Virginia Dept of Emergency Management for 2 years. Came on as a senior advisor to help with some technology stuff, and that was my thing. Throughout my career, I was always involved in technology-related things. Might be communications, might be thermal image cameras, might be iPads on fire apparatus, all those things. And became a technology editor for Firehouse Magazine as well, sharing these different things that were going on. And the bottom line is what they say is true, is that if you can find something that you would do for free as a volunteer and get paid for it, you'll never work a day in your life. And I guess that's what I can say about what I've done. And the technology has just taken me so many different places.
Well, thank you so much for your service to the community. We really appreciate it. Speaking on behalf of all of us, you talked a little bit about technology and your interest in technology. Was that the transition that got you interested in UAS, or how did that interest start?
So as I was about to retire in 2015, I was looking at the drone thing as far as the technology for the fire service, and actually had gone through and become a remote pilot and purchased a drone for our department, even though I was about to retire. I wrote an article that I kind of surmised there would be maybe at least 7 public safety use cases, and wrote an article about it. And today we learned that there are now over 50 public safety use cases. And there are over 6,000 public safety agencies in the United States that have drone programs. And that breakdown is 70% law enforcement, 25% fire, and 5% between emergency management, search and rescue, EMS, and the other small parts. So you're starting to see that it really does cross all the disciplines.
No, that makes a lot of sense. When I think about public safety UAS, your name comes up a lot in conversations, as does DroneResponders. So we really appreciate that. I know a little bit about what you do, but for the benefit of the people listening who aren't as familiar with you, can you talk a little bit about the work you guys are doing and what space you're taking these days?
So in 2019, I, along with Chris Todd, started DroneResponders, a nonprofit program to advance public safety UAS. And the whole idea was everybody was trying to do something from scratch. What do I have to do? What are the regulations? How do I write my policy? How do I train? So the first thing that we did was create the resource center. So right now, DroneResponders.org has the largest online resource center available to everyone, and membership and resources are all free. So anybody that goes to DroneResponders.org and wants to join can do so. And right now we are 12 members from 9,600. We're seeing about 100 new members a month, and we're expecting to be at 10,000 or more by October. And the whole idea here is to start sharing information. So we get information from different departments. We put SOPs, checklists, policies, procedures, training methods, and best practices so that everybody can do that. Then we also partnered with NASA and Esri to create the online dashboard. And on our website, you can also see the dashboard, which has over 1,600 agencies, which are actually sharing their information to anyone who wants to go and visit. So you can filter it by state, by country, or by discipline. And the bottom line is there is you can see when they started, how many remote pilots they have, what aircraft they're flying, what missions they're flying, because those are the important questions you're going to need to know as you start thinking about doing a program. A lot of people start on a program and they really haven't thought through what they're going to do with it because they don't know. And then they buy the wrong aircraft. So we also do 5 conferences a year around the country. We have our specific one we have in March at Busch Gardens in Virginia. That'll be 11th and 12th of March next year in 2025. This year, we had over 600 people present. We became the largest public safety UAS conference in the world because we're focused just on public safety UAS. And now we're just seeing so many different use cases, both inside, outside, on tethers. It's just amazing of what's happening in the space.
It's interesting with the committees you've served on and kind of the interdisciplinary work you've done. I think about that a lot of you've got a lot of very smart people. Some have very big personalities as well, too. As you guys are navigating collaboration, information sharing, rising the level of all these agencies together, what have you learned along the way about that collaboration and what's worked?
What's really great, I'll give one great example. And I'm not sure if you've heard of drone as a first responder or not. And that's where an agency launches a drone from the top of a building, and they have a visual observer who's watching that flies up to 2 miles beyond visual line of sight, and it gets over the scene. What we've seen is that collaboration is all the agencies that have DFR programs in the United States. And what we're seeing is what are best practices? What are you learning? What are things that are trends that are helping or working better with the aircraft itself? What are you seeing as far as battery usage, time of flight? How's weather affect things? But what's really more important is we learned that the FAA doesn't always tell everybody the same thing. So as people apply for COAs, a certificate of authorization, which allows them to fly this mission, some of the wording on the COAs are a little bit different. So very quickly, the flag goes up and somebody sends it out to the entire group of over 100 and some people now. And we are able to deal with issues and get clarifications and go, so is that good for everybody or is that just for these people? But one of the biggest examples was we ran into a roadblock. So we'd gone from taking a year to get a DFR waiver down to 2 weeks after a year's work with the FAA, and that was establishing the relationships and the group working together. We suddenly came to a roadblock where the waivers just stopped. And very quickly, we have all the agencies saying, hey, we're the new group. We're trying to get in and we can't get our waivers approved. And so I'm kind of that corridor and linked to the FAA because I'm talking with the FAA probably once or twice a week on different things. And we also do an FAA webinar each month. And so I reached out and said, hey, we have these agencies that are all lined up. They've got their applications in. They're seeing nothing come back. They're not getting answers. And in a matter of 2 weeks, the issue was resolved. It was one person who became a fly in the ointment, and we got it addressed very quickly.
Well, that's fantastic because I know if you don't have those connections, it can be quite overwhelming on how you get into that. So, and that kind of leads me to a question about technology and an issue that I'm always really interested in as I talk to folks, which is about technology adoption in public safety and kind of the road to that, where you see sometimes resistance within public safety communities to new technology for very good reasons that are well established. You've had such a length of service in public safety, and there's a lot of wisdom and experience that comes from that. I'm curious if you have thoughts about, you've been exposed to kind of the latest and greatest things in a lot of different areas over time. Some have made it and become ubiquitous, and some kind of just fell by the wayside. And if there was something in common that made the things that were successful that you've noticed?
Well, I think there's 3 things that I learned about the technology, which I would end up actually dictating to vendors. If you want to sell technology to me, there's 3 things your technology has to do. The first thing is value proposition. What does it mean for me and what's it going to do for me? The second is, how much is it going to cost? Because public safety has very limited budgets. And the third is, it has to be something that's relatively easy to implement into the system. If it doesn't meet all 3 of those things, we don't really have much to talk about. That's what we've learned. Now, with drones, it's a little bit more complicated because of regulations because of the different types of aircraft that you're going to buy, the payloads, and what kind of missions you're going to fly. But the value proposition is so huge. And it really isn't as difficult if you know what you're getting into and how to work through the process. And that's the other part is DroneResponders also is designed that if you need help, we help. We answer your questions. We link you to the FAA. And if you need, we link you to a mentor department that's already been through it that will walk you through the process.
One of the questions I love to ask, because you've been around a lot of public safety organizations starting programs, is, for the people who are listening to this, who are contemplating that idea, right? And there's a lot of work to get off the ground. There are some lessons you can learn the easy way and some the hard way. And we try to avoid the hard way as much as we can. What advice do you give to folks who are thinking about getting started on how to get started? Is it resource or budget or administrative, or is there a particular piece of advice that's really meaningful?
Well, in our resource center, we have what's called the guidelines and considerations for starting a drone program. And it basically just walks you through the elements that you're going to be looking at. So the first thing is you're going to be into regulations. You're going to have to understand what it means to be a remote pilot, what it means to fly, because you're technically a pilot in the national airspace, you have to pass a knowledge test. So it tells you that. But there are also some other nuances. So if you're going to fly, you have two different ways to fly. One is commercial under Part 107 as a public safety agency, or under a certificate of authorization as a public aircraft operation, or PAO. They're two uniquely different things, and you can have both, which we recommend, have both of them, because then you have the most versatility. But what's interesting is you've got to be able to choose from the time you launch your mission which set of rules you're going to fly under, so that you make sure that you're flying, because if something goes wrong, the first thing the FAA is going to say is, what rules are you flying under? And some nuances are different, like if you're under a COA, you don't have to have a visual observer. I mean, you have to have a visual observer. If you're under Part 107, you don't. So if you got, for example, you're out in the middle of rural United States and you've got a train derailment and you want to see what's going on and you're the first one there with a drone, you can go ahead and fly. You don't have to have a visual observer and get that quick assessment. Then it gets into, what are you going to do with the drone? You really need to know, what kind of missions are you going to fly? And that's where talking with another department that's done it, or we have a presentation that goes through that as well. And we have a 10-minute video that has live missions captured that are narrated that tell how the drone was used in these different missions, which I'm glad to share with you. And if you want to share any of these resources, you're welcome to do so. And then we link them up with other departments. That's the best thing is you're going to find out, they're going to tell you, look, don't do this, don't do that. What we saw from the beginning is that if you're going to be successful, the most important thing you're going to do first, once you decide you're going to, is your community outreach program. Is you've got to reach out to the public and tell them what you're going to use the drone for, and more importantly, what you're not going to use the drone for. And that you're not going to be using it for random surveillance, and that you're going to be using it for missions, training, or demonstrations, and that's all. And I know that in Charlottesville, Virginia, where our police department did a video, and they basically say, look, if you see our drone in the air, we're doing one of three things. We're on a mission, we're doing training, or we're demonstrating to you what it's about. And then have the policies online so there's transparency, and have town hall meetings. And we have that outreach program in our resource center that you can use to customize for yourself, that walks you through doing these things and making sure you have your elected officials informed. Because if you catch them uninformed and they get hit by the public with questions, you're already in a bad way. And some places started their programs without doing that and had to stop and restart.
That's a great point, and something we love to talk about, because we see the entire spectrum across at least our customers of people engaging with the public, explaining their program, doing great community relations. You talked about it there a little bit, but are there best practices that you've landed on or noticed over time in terms of having that conversation with the community, especially with communities that have concerns about privacy?
That's why we put the outreach program out there, is we did learn from that. We saw town hall meetings with kids and school groups, meeting with teachers along with parents, as well as at city council meetings, being able to give that information openly that goes out in the official meetings so that people hear it and they realize you're not trying to be secret about anything. You're just being able to use it to improve our safety. And we include as many of the ACLU rules as we can in that, using their guidance to say, we want to make sure that we are addressing the privacy issue as much as we can.
That's a great way to think about it as well, too. We talked a little bit about, starting on the right foot with your program. Have you noticed people who struggle? Is there something in common about, is there a wrong foot they started on in particular? Or is there something they didn't think about? Like, how do we help people avoid the big miss getting started?
The first big example in the early stages were people buying very big, expensive drones. Some bought like a drone for $50,000 and have never flown it to this date. because it wasn't the right aircraft. They got sold a bill of goods. That's where really knowing what your program's going to do and understanding the rules and the regulations that you're going to have and that you've got to speak to your community. That's where people have gone wrong by not knowing what aircraft to buy and buying the wrong one or two. The other part is not realizing that at the end of the day, you'll spend more money on batteries than on the aircraft itself. And then there's what else goes with it. If you're going to use some kind of equipment, payloads, spotlights, speakers, all those kind of things, how does that work? And then you've got to maintain it all. And you've got to maintain flight logs. And that's where it's important. One of the things that we see still a bit of a struggle with is some departments not realizing they really probably need to think of this as an aviation division, because you are an aviator and you have an aviation program and you're flying the national airspace where there are manned aircraft. And so you've got to be doing it the right way. And some people don't do that. They make some mistakes very quickly. So it's really just knowing what you're getting into and how to go about doing it. And when you don't do those things and don't have that knowledge, that's where we see the missteps take place.
Yeah, that's excellent. Interesting right now. We're in the middle of an election cycle or a legislative cycle, even though I don't know if they ever end anymore. They just seem perpetual. And over the last couple of years, we've kind of seen a lot of bubble up of conversations around country of origin concern for hardware in particular, whether you're talking about Huawei and cell phone communication networks or you're talking about UAS programs as well too. You've thought about this quite a lot and you've seen some of these fads come and go over time. Do you feel like the environment where that conversation is happening the way it's happening right now, is that a passing fad or people scoring political points, or is this something that's going to be a persistent conversation we need to be better prepared for?
There's two different sides to this. So one, country of origin ban, in my opinion, becomes problematic. And now we did in our survey, we asked public safety in the United States, what would you prefer? And 85% of our respondents said they would prefer to have an American-made drone if all things were equal. The problem that comes into place is that DJI has been subsidized for so long that they have come in and kind of owned the market. I believe I'd heard something like there were several $1 billion of subsidies that went into what turns out to be a 4.8 billion plus market. So the examples and challenges are that the American companies are fighting labor costs. They're fighting having to get the supply chain from China because that's where it's all made. I heard one company say, we might have one engineer and they have 1,000. So if you look at that change in the technology that continues to evolve, the realistic side of things is this is a geopolitical issue. It's this tension that we have between China and Taiwan, and I've heard China and the Philippines, and that kind of thing, which is bigger than all of us. And what's happened is we've seen this thing come across with Congress. Probably one of the few things that both sides of Congress can agree on is China bad. So, we look back and we see that we kind of let ourselves get here. We let everything that we buy be manufactured in China, our pharmaceuticals. We saw during COVID, we ran into the mask issue that all the masks were in China, no longer being produced in the United States. So my hope is that they would still focus on the data security on the drones, to say all drones need to have data security, whether they're American-made or not, and that they have a higher security level to prevent from being hacked.
So, when I hear that, I hear Washington and Congress and global supply chains and these issues that are so much bigger than an individual community. But with a lot of this regulation and legislation, it's coming home and affecting an individual public safety organization that may not think about their place within that larger chain. But I guess the question is, if I'm a sheriff, if I'm a chief, if I have a UAS program, knowing what you know now, seeing those trends you're seeing, is this something that needs to start taking up a percentage of my time, a percentage of my brain time to think about, do I need to really get involved these days?
Yeah, I think you do. And I think that one, we're seeing state legislatures now taking action, like you saw, you may have seen in Florida, where they enacted the blue drone restriction that you had to have a blue drone. Well, the only thing about blue drones are technically a blue drone doesn't have remote ID on it because it's exempted from DoD. So that immediately says it doesn't work in the public safety side, but now we're working towards the other directions. But I think as a fire chief or a sheriff, you need to be looking at this because some state legislatures are enacting laws. And one, you need to be informed so that you can actually educate them the impact so they don't have the same thing that happened in Florida where you had a group of people that didn't know what they were doing. The blue list that they used was the first version. It wasn't even the complete version. And they gave a year of transition to change the drones out without any funding. So you have some departments that have spent upwards of $1 million in their drone program. Now imagine that you're trying to make up $1 million in a year. And the problem is that there's three things that public safety bases their purchase on for these drones. is basically the performance, capability, and cost. And everybody said, all things being equal, we'll buy American drones. Now we're seeing some great progress. We're seeing Skydio come out with their new aircraft, and it's got many of the features. And we're seeing Brink just announce a new DFR drone. And so we're seeing the American companies striving to do that, but they're struggling to fight the challenges they have. And what I've said to members of Congress straight out is, look, if you want to balance this playing field, then subsidize the American companies with a performance and cost requirement so that they have a way to meet those challenges. And so far, we haven't seen anybody take that up, except there was the new DFR Act that came out, but there's a lot of complications along with that act.
So it sounds like they do need to get involved. So if I'm leading a public safety organization, I don't want to say those people are anything other than very sophisticated and working around politics, because those are often very political jobs. But doing kind of government affairs, doing advocacy can be a little overwhelming to get started necessarily. So when people talk about, they say, I feel the need to get involved. I have a voice. I want it to be amplified. I want to be part of that conversation. What advice would you give those sort of folks about how do you get started as being part of that conversation?
We do some of these presentations. We do webinars. We have conferences. That would be the thing that I would say is get involved in the activities that are occurring in and around your area. It used to be that the conferences or workshops and stuff that were being done were very limited. Now we're seeing hundreds of programs around the country. I just got off the phone with one from California asking for a speaker for 2 classes. And again, it's becoming aware of what all is involved and then what are the avenues that you can take to be engaged with that.
There's some interesting legislation happening at the federal level. There hasn't been voted on yet. And there's also similar legislation that you alluded to at different state legislatures around the country. When you're thinking 18 months from now, what's your gut instinct tell you where we're going to be in terms of legislative affairs? Will some of these things pass? How will we adapt?
That really, I would say, all depends on what happens on the global scale. For example, if China should take some kind of action against Taiwan, then all bets are off. It's hard to say what will happen at that point. If nothing else changes from what we see today, we're probably going to be in a similar place that we are right now. It'll be like popcorn. The things will pop up here and there, but it won't be an across the board action.
Again, looking over the horizon, but maybe more in terms of just the pure technology, because, if I'm anything, I'm a tech nerd and I love thinking about what's coming down the pipe. Is there stuff that you're seeing that's coming in the near or medium term that gets you excited, or stuff that you wish was coming in particular that you would like to see people bring to market?
Yeah. So the one overwhelming thing would be really effective detect and avoid technology that's on the aircraft. That will dramatically change and enhance the ability for beyond visual line of sight operations overnight. Because one of the things we're seeing now is the main factor for the FAA is the safety of aircraft that have people on board. So it's making sure that the drones that we have don't come in contact with people-occupied aircraft. And that would greatly change the whole dynamic, because it would also be able to detect drone-on-drone technology. Now, what's kind of exciting is I've been talking to a company in Israel called Syconia, and they've developed a vehicle-to-vehicle detect and avoid technology that can communicate both with drones and manned aircraft. So a helicopter can actually see and it can communicate with them, and it will actually force the drone to take specific action if the remote pilot doesn't act accordingly. So those kind of things are going to be what change. Additionally, I would say the ability to fly more than one aircraft by one pilot, so multiple aircraft by one pilot, the ability of swarm technology to fly beyond visual line of sight for things like search and rescue, or even damage assessment on a larger scale. And then I think the exciting thing is going to be artificial intelligence, of being able to utilize the drones to go out and do damage assessment, and they can actually take information from previous satellite surveys to be able to identify the areas that have damage and make those damage assessment imagery in place to do that. Those are my top things.
You alluded to earlier having to speak with the FAA on the regular and having relationships with folks over there. And I know for some of the agencies that we talk to, that's quite intimidating. They sound big and sophisticated. I mean, these are human beings trying to do their job as best they can. I want to give them a great deal of credit for doing so. Are there tips you have in terms of how to think about the relationship with the FAA for a lot of these agencies, or best practices for working with them that you come to? You mentioned you overcome some hurdles recently, so I was just curious.
We have a couple of people that I'll just name off really quickly that I've worked with that have made a difference. First, Michael O'Shea is our FAA liaison, and he came from public safety, and he was over at DOJ and I think NIJ and some different things. So he was one of us, and so he was easy to talk to, and he always gave the joke that we're always willing to listen, but the answer is always no. And he had a caveat with that to say there's a little bit of humor with that because the FAA is responsible for safety in the national airspace. That's their number one priority. And so when drones come, it's complicated. It's the unknown. We've got lots of people flying in our national airspace, and we don't know what that means. We don't know what it's going to be from hazards. Now we do know, but Michael Shea has been really big behind the scenes of helping us navigate and connect with the right FAA people. Carrie Fleming's with the SOSC, the Support Operations Center, during emergencies that give us SGIs, special government interest waivers, immediately during emergencies. Fantastic group of people that we've got this wonderful relationship. John Meehan is with Flight Standards. He's the guy that is the walking encyclopedia of FAA rules and regulations. Don't try to pull something on him because he's going to read it to you right from his head. But what he's been able to do is look at statistics and say, okay, now we've got some statistics. Let's look at what we're doing. And so some exciting things that I may be letting out of the bag sooner than they want, but they're working now on the waivers to allow flights over people under Part 107 and flights over moving vehicles. That may have come out already. But that was because of relationships, conversations. And when we did the DFR waiver, if you looked at the IPP, the Integration Pilot Project that came out under President Trump, there were 4 guiding principles from it. And one of them was we're going to learn. And the second was we're going to then use that learning to expand and put these things out in the community. If we learn and don't do anything with it, it's kind of a waste of time. And we had a hard time. And I remember I went to the IPP collective meeting with Chula Vista, and we were talking about that and a tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver, which allows us during an active shooter or hostage situation or hazmat where it's dangerous to have a visual observer to be actual out of line of sight for 1,500 feet. And the FAA came back and said, look, you've answered all the questions from the air, but we as the FAA also have to consider the ground safety requirements. And I was able to stand up and say, well, no, you don't, because in these situations, we own that perimeter. That's our perimeter. We take care of the situation, which changed the whole dynamic in the conversation. But it was the relationships and the conversations. And the FAA has been really good at listening more and more as they understand what we do and how we do it. And us understanding what their position is and what they're trying to do.
Well, that's wonderful to hear that we're having good conversations like that, because we don't always have that distributed across the community. So not everybody gets to have that perspective on it. The other thing that I've noticed is, and again, I may be admitting my age, I'm still a newspaper reader. And a lot of the stories that I see where the word UAS or drone appears these days, particularly talks about the conflict in Ukraine. Like that comes up a lot. And we know that military is consuming a lot of hardware, which has made it more difficult when you're trying to buy batteries and props and things like that. There have been backlogs and challenges to our customers as well, too. And people know the industry. But it has brought UAS technology into the consciousness, I think, of a lot of people within our communities that weren't aware about it very much. Now, admittedly, journalists, even on the national level, aren't technicians, right? They don't understand exactly how it works. They're doing the best they can. But I was curious if you have noticed that conversation happening in the public sphere around the military side of it, starting to affect the civilian and public safety side too as a conversation.
Yes, because what we've seen is that the UAS have changed warfare dramatically to where the drones can be very tactical and very precision oriented to take out tanks and cars and people and very quickly, very easily, and very inexpensively. Not using big drones, using the small UAS drones to be able to penetrate certain areas and take out large pieces of equipment because they're dropping grenades like a tank. So there's the concern, but we're also starting to see some things happening in the United States that are not necessarily warfare oriented, but they are on the nefarious side of things. So we're seeing the cartels using the drones to monitor the border patrols and be able to work around how they're patrolling the borders to get people across. We're seeing transportation of drugs and fentanyl used by drones. And then we've even seen some cartels using explosives on other cartels. So that's one thing. But in the United States, we're also starting to see one of the biggest issues that we have and the need for detection and mitigation of drones is in prisons and correctional facilities, is that contraband is being dropped in more and more. That's the most common problem that we've seen. And it creates chaos. In some cases, it's created deaths because people trying to get what it is, because it can be anything from drugs to cigarettes to weapons. And in South Carolina, I believe a drone even helped assist someone in escape from a prison. So the reality is it's not a matter of if, it's when the drones are going to be used in a nefarious way. I know that in 2022, I think the NFL had documented 2,200 drone incursions over open field football games. And typically those are mostly the curious and the clueless. In some cases, they don't know they're not supposed to be doing that. But most of them are just curious, wanting to see what's happening in a football game. But if we had a drone that flew over, and even if it dropped an insignificant powder over a crowd of people, we as public safety now go into a decontamination mode. And we could also have the chance of chaos and people just trampling each other because they're trying to get away from whatever's perceived. Then on top of that, we could have actual hazmat material dropped, or we could have something dropped that could be injurious to people on the spot, like acid or something like that. So yeah, we're concerned, and DroneResponders is also a member of the Counter UAS Coalition, which is working with Congress to try to get the abilities of detect and mitigation transferred out to state and local, because right now it's only 4 federal agencies that can do actual mitigation of drones. But that's going to require a great deal of work, of policies, of procedures, the training. So we're already behind the game. And I wrote an article that talked about, there's a book about surprises and about how you shouldn't be surprised when you already know the things that could happen. So we know these things are possible, and it's not going to be long before someone determines a way that they're going to threaten others.
Counter US is a really interesting point, especially from we're seeing manufacturers signal to us that they're going to start reducing the geofencing built into the technology to begin with. When people are talking about counter UAS to you and what they need to think about and how they need to start getting prepared, because again, our prison systems, our judicial systems are vulnerable to those sorts of things. And you're describing what would be a terrible scenario to happen when I'm just trying to take my family to a sporting event. If something drops on my head, it would be terrifying. What are you hearing? What are the conversations happening in that space about what people need to start thinking about and getting ready?
There's some things we've seen that places can put in place to help protect themselves and shield certain areas. That's one thing. That's just a matter of how you build and put things in place. The second thing is we really need detection capabilities. Detection of those kind of things really make the biggest difference of being able to identify good from bad. So who are the good actors and who are the bad actors? If I can see all the aircraft and say, okay, I know these are mine, but these other ones that are popping up, I don't know who they are. And right now, through detection capabilities, which are still limited in some cases to only federal agencies, they've been able to, it's like the Super Bowl, I think they handled 96% of the problems just by locating the pilot and telling them you got to put the drone down. But we need to have something that's going to be more reliable, something that's going to be quicker, that gives us a much better assessment of the approaching possibility of a drone. And that's one of the things that we're pushing for, because it's also going to be important. The whole airspace awareness is going to be important, not only for nefarious actors, but for the whole thing that comes forward. Beyond visual line of sight operations, advanced air mobility, we're going to have this detecting capability to give us that awareness.
Now, I know you've been involved with a lot of different organizations helping to write policy, best practices, playbooks, the IAFC, amongst others folks. Where do we still have areas to grow in that space? What should we be working on that'll help benefit our whole community?
As I mentioned before, we need to be thinking of ourselves as an aviation program specifically, so that we've got the mindset of an aviator that's thinking about all the safety that goes in place, doing the right risk assessments, but also using systems that will allow us to take care of all the things we need to take care of. So we've got flight logs that have to be maintained. We've got the certifications of people that need to be managed. We've got the aircraft maintenance issues, and all those things really need to be handled in a way that they're all covered in the easiest way possible, because we've seen people with spreadsheets. We've seen people maybe not doing enough of anything. And when we did our survey once, we asked the agencies, how many of you are doing your regular weekly or biweekly updates of your firmware? And we only got back 25%. The next big thing is really developing the standardized training that we need to have in place, because right now there is no standardized training curriculum or program that's out there that's being taught that would certify you like you do for a police officer or firefighter, because it's still so new. And we know those kind of things take time. And so that's one of the things we're working on. We work with MITRE to create the SOAR program, which is Safely Operating Aircraft Remotely, which really went in to start teaching the fundamentals of maneuvering the aircraft, to give some way to measure that a person, after they've taken the class, knows how to fly the aircraft. Because really, when it comes down to it, the only requirement from the FAA is a knowledge test. Imagine people getting a driver's license to drive by taking a knowledge test only on the road. And now we're flying in the air where there's people flying on aircraft that are occupied. So All those things it's the culture, it's the keeping the records and information all together so that we're making sure we're getting it all done right.
One of the areas I have a lot of empathy to is all the different variations of public safety UAS programs I see, and all the program administrators across this country in particular who wrestle with having to keep those programs going, having to keep funding, having to communicate with the community, having to communicate with political leaders and leaders within their own department. And one of the gaps that I've seen in the conversations I've had is there's not a lot of agreement and maybe not enough thought quite yet on what are the success criteria you should be amplifying out of your program, that you should be kicking upstairs to your leadership, that you should be telling your community about? And I know it would be different potentially between fire and law enforcement and lots of other areas, but are there common themes you think that you would give people recommendations, say, hey, these are the things that really move the needle, that demonstrate value, that you should talk about?
Yes, and what we've seen is too many times they're not sharing the successes of what their drone program has done. And so what we're seeing is a lot of places that are telling the story are having great success with that because it also helps to get additional funding. I mean, New York City is a great example. They're in the process now of using drones and going to drones as a first responder, and it's going to aid in giving them situational awareness over a very highly populated area for major events. And there are other departments that do the same thing. Chula Vista has told the program about the story of a person who reportedly had a gun outside of a restaurant, and the drone got there first and zoomed in, and it was a cigarette lighter. There are other departments that had reports of kids in a gang with guns. And in that particular case, they flew watching the kids run. They finally got him. They had police at a certain area to get him confined and got him on the ground, laying on the ground. And one of the kids started to reach up into his backpack, and the drone said he's reaching his backpack. And the police officer said, "Get your hand out of the backpack." And so the kid pulled his hand out of the backpack, and then they were able to zoom in closer to see they were the air guns. They weren't real guns. So again, you take that information away, and you have a dynamically different situation. In Oklahoma City, they had it flying over and they avoided an ambush because they saw a guy waiting in an area. They also used another incident on a highway where the guy was holed up in a vehicle off the road and they were watching with the drone, and he's reaching for an AR-15. And so it's the fires that we're seeing in New York City where they're flying over and being able to see really areas they couldn't see before. They're seeing through smoke and directing elevated streams directly on the fire so that it's actually applying and extinguishing the fire where before you were shooting into the dark. And one of the big things with that is that as you continue to flow water, each pound of water weighs 8.33 pounds. And so every gallon of water adds that much weight to the building, which structurally affects that. And then the ability to see the firefighters operating on a roof, or to be using the thermal image camera to see that the roof you're about to send a firefighter on to ventilate is not, the integrity is gone. So you avoid someone being killed, or a hazmat situation of being able to assess the spill and where it's going, the amount of contamination, pollution, and being able to fly in and do detection and identify the chemicals. I mean, I could go on forever about the stories that you can tell, and the people are amazed. The people are like, wow, we had no idea. Or you find that lost child, there's nothing better than that. Well, yeah, we got to get 10 more drones. But yeah, we're seeing DFR programs. There's a department in Maryland that has had so many great successes that now they have members of their council fighting to who's going to get the next DFR location. It does matter. And just, it's something I didn't share with you before, but originally a lot of places where they start drone programs, people look at them as toys. They say, they're toys. And you get your existing people saying, we don't see the value. But after about a year, when the drone's not there, the question is, where's the drone? That's how much it's changed.
And so putting yourself in the shoes of those folks, talking to, say, a political leader, someone on a city council, a city manager, saying, why do we really need a drone program? It sounds like a lot of money, a lot of work, and a lot of hassle. What are we going to get out of it that justifies that? Do you tell them stories like that help bring that home? Or is it statistics? Or what have you found that's been the most successful?
It's a combination of both. One, when you can say that a drone as a first responder program returns unit to service 25% of the time before the unit even arrives on the scene, that means your police units are back in service to serve the community, which are already struggling with short staff. That's one. The second is the actual stories. When you can show the video of a guy that has a drone and you can tell them we're going in thinking a person has a gun and the drone shows otherwise, it becomes pretty amazing. When you show that you've had a situation with hazmat where you're able to have a better understanding of what an example would be East Palestine, Ohio. We did an interview with them. They said without the drone, it would have taken us another 24 hours for us to understand the situation we were facing. And they used that to fly in and identify that 3 of the pressure relief devices on the tank cars weren't working, which means then you have a potential of a very catastrophic explosion. And then the private contractors came in and used that and went in and attached, God help them for doing this, but going in and attaching explosives to those cars that the PRDs weren't working on and did a planned explosion. So they were minor and it released the pressure. I mean, those are all the things that you're seeing. And then another example from Chula Vista, Drone as a First Responder program, this one will make you chill, is they get a call for a vehicle on fire on I-5 and they're getting wrong information. People are seeing it from a distance and giving guesses. And so they're dispatching units. And because they also have live 911, they can hear the dispatch and the call. Well, the sergeant on duty at Chula Vista decided, Chula Vista units, go ahead and respond to this call, which they don't usually go to I-5. That's highway patrol. And the drone as a first responder launched, and within a minute, the drone identified the exact location of the call. And from that, it switches from the aerial view of the vehicle, 2/3 involved with fire. Police officers were on the scene going to a body camera and pulling the person out of the car. And as they pull the person out of the car after breaking the back window, the car is fully involved. The car is burned, but that person is alive today because of drone as a first responder.
No, that's fantastic. You guys are working on so many different things right now. And I know you have your fingers in a lot of different pies working through different things. Is there something that's the most important that you guys are working on right now that you'd like to share with us that's exciting?
First of all, the drone as a first responder program is going to be the most impactful change in policing that we've seen in decades. So that's one thing that we're working on with. We have a DFR working group, as I mentioned before, that's working really hard on moving that forward and working on trying to get the technologies in place. Because right now we have to have a visual observer on the roof. And you can imagine a visual observer is not really effective. We know that. So we're trying to get the technology approved more quickly. The other thing that we're doing that's really exciting that we're working on is the training aspect, is really trying to work on getting that training in place that has a standardized curriculum that's for all public safety remote pilots. And then we create endorsements of the specializations that you might have within it. So to fly is one thing, to fly a SWAT mission is another, to fly a hazmat mission is another, to fly a wildfire is another, because each one of those have unique traits that you need to be able to understand what you're flying, how you're flying, and the conditions that are in each one of those situations that you're doing.
Well, that's all the questions I had prepared for you today. So it's time to send us out with the opportunity to let you share a shameless plug or tell the people something you're super excited about these days, or maybe how they can get in touch with you if they want to learn more.
So first, I would just urge people, go to DroneResponders.org, join. It's free. All the resources are free. The second is anybody can reach out to me if they like. My email is charles@DroneResponders.org. I'm glad I get about 100 emails a day. I'm still trying to catch up with that. Just so you know, I do this all volunteer. I do not receive any compensation, and I work about 20 hours a week on drone responders alone just to continue advancing this, because my passion is to get this technology in the hands of all the public safety agencies as quickly as possible and to help them work through the process of doing it so that they first know what they're getting into and that they have the resources and other capabilities access from other departments to be able to help them as they go through the process.
Well, Chief, thanks again for taking the time to visit with us today. Thank you for all of those really valuable insights. I appreciate you taking time to share it with us today. And thank you to everyone out there listening on the internet. Look to see and talk to you again here next time on Dronecast. Thanks, everybody. Dronecast, Rethinking Public Safety One Drone at a Time, is brought to you by DroneSense. To find out more about DroneSense and how our comprehensive situational awareness platform can help you fly, share, and manage your drone program, please visit DroneSense.com. That's DroneSense.com. And then make sure to search for Dronecast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that podcasts are found. Please don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at DroneSense, thanks for listening.